Are we indeed living in a dystopian movie? Short answer, yes. Long answer, no. That's it. Well, that's all we got, guys. Nah. I'm actually gonna watch this because yeah, another video recommended. Mm, have I watched videos from him before? I don't know. Let's just go in. Usually have preamble, but not today.
From the Time Machine to 1984 all the way to the Hunger Games, dystopias have only gotten more popular over time. This could be because the stories they tell and the worlds they explore seem increasingly similar to our own. Looking at all the seeming
I mean, I think they're more just peak American fiction at the time. Like, movies between 2000s and 2000, I'd say 12, 15, or hell, even 15, was just peak entertainment because they came out at such good times. But I do believe a lot of them are very prophetic because, they pointed out, certain things took into the absolute extremes that some people see might happen, some people see won't, or did at least didn't think would happen at the time. Like you didn't think like Watch Dogs would be happening at the time. You have this overarching surveillance government looking over its citizens, but then you see what's happening in the UK and how people getting arrested over tweets on Facebook, and you're like, oh shit, that shit's actually happening. Or like in Dread, where you had the apartment wars, and you're like, oh well, that this it's an interesting situation. Then you see the Venezuelan gangs that took control of apartments and are very organized. And you're like, oh wait a minute, hold on. I think in like Louisiana, you're like, hold the fucking phone. Like, yeah, now I think a lot of people are referring to old American fictions to see the things that are happening to this day.
the unsolvable issues within our own society leads us to that very question. Are we today also living in a dystopia? Well, to understand whether our world qualifies as one, we really need to just figure out what a dystopia actually is, and what sets dystopian media apart from other genres. At the most basic level, it can be understood as the mirror image of a utopia. While a utopian society is either close or has already attained perfection, a dystopia is the opposite. It's a world where negative aspects of society or massive looming problems dominate everything else. It could be nearly anything, from out of control technology to an oppressive regime, or even the consequences of some cataclysmic world-changing event. As long as you've got that, the only restriction is that society still needs to exist. While it wouldn't be very nice to live in a world where the zombie apocalypse has taken place, if wider society has already broken down, then it wouldn't be a dystopia. So this is the nuts and bolts of the genre, but it still doesn't really tell us anything about why people like the genre or how much a dystopia resembles our own world.
I mean, again, people like it because it's interesting fiction. It's an interesting light on, this fictional world and fictional story and the fictional things that happen to fictional people. I mean, it's why people like, a lot of like dystopian books. There are a lot of philosophies behind them. You can say the same thing about TV shows. You can say the same thing about comics. And they're also just entertaining. I mean, that's why I like these. Now, again, this is apart from the prophetic angle.
One lucky byproduct of how messed up the world has become is that we've got plenty of material here to help us along. When the world shut down in early 2020, it was pretty easy to see why people thought we were living in a dystopia. Between the empty streets and the 24/7 news coverage, it was almost impossible to go through your day without being confronted by it all. It wasn't surprising that in the first 2 months of the outbreak, the game Plague Inc. saw its global downloads more than double, pushing it towards the top of the App Store charts. Its gameplay
yeah. I guess I think that was also the reason because most entertainment games sort of like when you're in saying like recessions, people invest a lot in entertainment. and Plague Inc. was just sort of that meme game. So yeah, I can kind of see that happening.
Managing the spread of a pathogen was all the more relevant. The film Contagion, which depicts an imaginary flu pandemic, also saw a massive burst of interest. It went from being the 270th most popular movie straight into the iTunes top 10 for digital downloads. These jumps in popularity were pretty predictable, really, in the same way that any movie which seems to predict the future will see renewed interest. If audiophobic aliens really did invade, then A Quiet Place would probably see a meaty bump in sales, at least among people who don't mind reading subtitles. But while Contagion and Plague Inc. aren't really dystopias either, it does illustrate the key behind what's made the genre what it is today. Dystopias are based on taking a problem with our own world and magnifying it until it dominates and defies everything. If you're a writer or any kind of artist, there's clearly more value in doing this with negative aspects of society compared to the good parts. It's
Yeah, it's also very easy to do. I mean, it's like you're making a D&D campaign based off things that have happened in the real world, but dialing up to 1,000. I mean, isn't like the Stalker games kind of something like that, where the reactor didn't explode in Chernobyl, but aliens visited and they left things on the earth that us humans can barely comprehend and left. And now we're just picking at the scraps, and there's a lot of factions in like the zone or that area around Chernobyl. I mean, I think people like dystopians for the same reason people like sci-fi. I mean, it's just interesting concepts dialed to 11.
boring to read or watch a film about a true utopia, as there isn't really any conflict or stakes when the problems have already been solved. But dystopian media, on the other hand, can tell us something about our own world. By magnifying a real problem through the lens of fiction, we get a different, more detailed look at it than we could get on our own. By making the problem define the entire story, it lets us focus completely on it. In our own lives, there's too many other things that get in the way, and it's in this way that dystopian media helps us take control over these daunting, practically unsolvable problems that we're faced with today. While there isn't much surviving philosophy on how to make a dystopia, there's plenty of philosophers who try to do the opposite, and figure out what makes a perfect society. Some of them never really saw their plans put into action. Plato's idea of an idealized society involved a strict caste system ruled over by mathematician philosopher kings. But as far as we know, nobody ever really tried this. Other ideas were more successful. Confucius and his ideas about society laid the bedrock for over 2,000 years of Chinese history. By far the most impactful utopian philosophy of recent history began with Hegel, a 19th century German philosopher. He saw history as a slow, inevitable march towards an enlightened, free society. In his view, everything was leading up to that utopian point, and it's an essential part of his theory of dialectics. But while we might not have reached that point yet, we have seen one of his students' theories put into practice. Marx took Hegel's ideas and applied them to a struggle between the workers and an oppressive ruling class. Over history, this internal struggle...
Yeah, and see, the reason why none of these things have happened is it's just human nature. I mean, humans are very conflict oriented, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, corrupt, per se. Like, human beings will always work in the interest of themselves and their families and their people around them and their friends. So, again, if you had a society ruled by a caste system ruled by mathematicians and of the like, you'll just have, again, a small few 1% of those with lots of money and lots of influence. Maybe they don't even practice the art, but still ruling over a lot of large groups of people and working in tandem with other mathematicians and other forms of the caste. I mean, you see this in today. I mean, again, I hate to go back to this, but with COVID, like, you had the media working hand in hands with social media sites, which is working hand in hand with the fucking government to suppress and for like just people even being slightly questioning the vaccine, the Fauci ouchie, right? And this is in today's Western world. You have many cases of these even happening in other countries, like in Africa, or like in Asian countries. I mean, it, the reason utopias don't happen is just there's always the human propensity to cause conflict and to be corrupt. And again, it's human nature. Like, there's not really anything you can do about it. It's just, at the very least, you need to make sure you, your family, and your friends are eating good before you start worrying about existential things. But again, you have these ideological people that are like, no, you need to care for these existential things even above yourself and the people around you and your family. And then you reach this odd dichotomy where, again, people live vicariously through concepts that they need to adhere to instead of for the people around them.
Struggle played out time and time again, inevitably leading to a communist utopia after the workers finally triumphed. But unfortunately, this never really happened either. In fact, when communists got into power, it led to some of the most dystopian and oppressive societies ever.
Yeah, because again, you had a couple of corrupt individuals that paved the way for everybody else. Again, that's exactly what happened.
It's a fault with people or it's a fault with communism itself doesn't really matter for our purposes. The fact remains that these utopian ideas enabled one of the most oppressive dystopian regimes in history. The Soviet Union even directly inspired one of the dystopias we'll talk about later. But it's clear that utopian thinking and the lengths people go to achieve it can easily lead to a dystopian society instead. Once the ends justify the means, any amount of suffering becomes excusable to reach the end goal. There are some theories that don't directly describe how to create a dystopia, but they do predict that the slide into a dystopian society is inevitable. One of my favorite TV shows is Mr. Robot, and you can probably tell by the amount of times we use the clips in the show. But did you ever see the mail service they use in the show? Well, they're actually today's sponsor, ProtonVPN. The VPN that is taking over the world with its massive global network. ProtonVPN offers a vast server network of 8,600 servers. You can watch shows and sports from anywhere by changing your IP location. Shield blocks ads and trackers for a better browsing experience. And allowing you to enjoy secure access to content including Netflix and torrenting, Proton's trusted reputation and accessible plans, starting at just $3.99. The general idea these theories share is that something about technology and scientific progression leads to a dystopia. Either we're guaranteed to abuse the tools it gives us, making the world worse, or the technology changes society itself and creates the conditions that lead to a dystopia. Ted Kaczynski, otherwise known as the Unabomber, was just one of the people who believed in these ideas.
Now, yeah, again, yet another person that a lot of people look back on and be dystopic, and is very prophetic. But I mean, the ideas he had, people can see, but the conclusion he had, like, okay, I'm a bomb, just a bunch of random people through mail. It's like, nigga, what? I'm sorry, what? But yeah, a lot of people look back on, the people like the Unabomber, like, yeah, he kind of predicted things that are happening today.
Insane thoughts on how to try and change things, and seemed delusional that he could even affect things in any way. But the basic ideas in his manifesto are lucid, and it was even used as evidence that he was very capable of knowing his actions were wrong, as it was a very well written manifesto with many interesting thoughts. You see, he thought that industrial society and technology was slowly stripping people of their natural freedom, whilst destroying the natural world in the process. The outward benefits of technology are enough to convince people to just let this happen, but he ignores just how much of an impact modern technology has in making people's lives better in general. For starters, lots of the people watching this today would be dead if not for modern medicine. Modern agriculture means that most people don't have to slave away in the fields, and bad weather doesn't generally lead to mass famine anymore. There's even the fact that as a country becomes more industrialized and more developed, it also becomes more likely that it's a democracy rather than a dictatorship. In nearly every metric.
Yeah, if you just allow people to produce, allow the country to produce, it brings prosperity. Now, there are obviously other problems that come with industrialization, right? Like in the great industrial era, yeah, there was a lot of misery, a lot of husbands drank their savings away and went home and beat their fucking wives. Like, yeah, there are clearly ups and downs, but the ups far surpass the down. And again, in a rich society, you're eventually going to reach these things. So at the end of the day, it comes down to values. What do we value over, you know, what has been lost, I suppose.
It does seem like technology has made the world better for most people, at least so far. The past 20 years or so have started to bring some...
Like, man, the great era of entertainment, I always harken back to the early 2000s, right? You know, just the great golden age of entertainment. Like, was just a good, like, it's so good that entertainment today is just a pale facsimile, or at least it tries to be, of what came before. And all of the things that came out that are now negatives, like social media and like video games and movies, like in the early 2000s, they were positives. And that people like, wow, look at these interesting devices, or wow, look at this awesome ass entertainment. Nowadays, all people really cry about is, oh, well, you need to show your government fucking ID online so everyone knows who you are, and God forbid that service provider gets data breached, because now God knows who across the fucking planet knows who you are. Or, oh, we need to regulate social media more, because God forbid one everyday American talks to another everyday American and expresses their idea, because, oh, they're far right, and that's bad. And it's surprising how every country on the fucking planet has a far right. It's like they're trying to homogenize this way of thinking to where, oh, liking as one's nation is bad and is evil and is cruel. And it's like, this is why people think we're living in a dystopian, because there are just not things you are allowed to like, and there's not things you're allowed to dislike. Because if you do like something, you'll just have a horde of fucking mentally ill little girls online come at you and be like, no, you're not supposed to like this because this is racist, sexist, bigoted. And you're like, shut the fuck up. Like, who are you? You're a complete fucking stranger with daddy issues. It's like, and again, I like video games. I think video games and American entertainment is the perfect way to profligate your culture. And Japan knows this. This is why when the politicians try to go after Japan, a lot of people are like, shut the fuck up. You know, they're making a good fucking product and making good entertainment. Who the fuck are you to talk to about them, right? Or like when they go after anime, you'll always have people that will defend it because it is a better product than even products here from the West. And I like games, and I talk about the things I like about games and things I dislike, but there are, again, things that you're not supposed to say you dislike in game design, because a bunch of people just come out of the fucking woodworks and come after you and say, oh, gamers are sexist, racist, bigoted, whatever. It's like, again, are we living in a dystopian? I guess, again, the short answer was yes. It's a dystopian of, like, people's own making in their head, to the point where they demand everyone else hold these dystopic ideas, otherwise they'll attack you. I mean, this is just peak Twitter. And again, in the long term, no, because damn good fucking things exist, and people need to, again, utilize, okay, what the fuck are your values? Like, do you value your connections? Because a lot of people don't just value money. I mean, people understand the importance of money, but a lot of people just don't value it. They don't value wealth. You know, they value their community. They value the people around them. They value their connections. They value the things they create. I mean, hell, some people value their ideology. I mean, this is at the end of the day what it all comes down to is values.
Some very big doubts into people's minds. When new technologies get developed today, it often seems like the negatives massively outweigh the benefits. The internet and instant global communication has led to social media and all the damage that's done to society as well. It also pushed mass surveillance and data harvesting into overdrive. AI promises to be the next big thing, but some of its most popular uses include role-playing with a fake girlfriend or replacing the Earth's need for humans in the first place. It all gives the impression that at some point...
Yeah, and again, that also comes down to values. I mean, it's like, okay, maybe someone's just autistic and maybe they don't really, do well around the ladies, and I think that's just fine. Some people will just always have to deal with that, but then again, I don't think the AI girlfriend is, the solution. But you never go after someone coping with the fact that they're autistic. Like, because you seem like the fucking asshole at the end of the day. I mean, it's not a situation that you'd want your child or you'd want the people around you to be. But it's also something you gotta accept is just going to happen. And at the end of the day, an AI will never replace an actual woman. I mean, even I had girlfriends. An AI will never replace that. Talking to a screen on to a hot big tittied waifu on the TV screen will just never replace actual physical bonds. And again, it's the fact that this is what people want. Again, you're not supposed... We live in this odd situation where you just cannot hang out with someone or be with someone unless they one for one share the exact same opinion, have the exact same ideas, hell, maybe even look the exact same as you, talk the exact same as you. And this leads to, people just severing bonds and burning bridges for fucking stupid reasons, right? And I think that's the problem, because again, before social media, before everyone demanded you see a therapist and add to the mental illness industrial complex in America, you had your community, and now some people even had religion. But you have the people around you, the people at your work, the people that was sort of like as this safety net to ensure the mental stability of people. But now now ideologically, people are trying to erode this away. So it's like, well, what the hell do you have? Well, I guess you really only have the screen in front of you, or you really just have, I don't know, the therapist you go to every day as the person that claims they're trying to help, but therapy is kind of bull crap. I mean, you could go to a priest and they actually know what the fuck they're talking about, or a rabbi or an imam. Like, choose a religion, and because they are also educated, they've been in these things for, been in the field for 30, 40, 50 plus years, and they actually deal with people in their community, in their convent that has issues, and they don't care if you pay them or they don't care if you stick around. I mean, at the end of the day, how they get paid is through tithes, either at church or at the mosque. Like, that's how they get paid. So if anything, you're just bothering them, but which is why they will try to help. I mean, their incentive isn't for you to come back. The incentive is really for you to stay.
In the past few decades, technology became more destructive than constructive for society. And if this trend does exist and it does continue into the future, it will lead to a dystopian society if it hasn't already. With all of that said, we can get down to the specifics. The question of whether our world is a dystopia might be best answered by people's personal experiences. If the world's problems are preventing someone from having a good and meaningful life, then for all intents and purposes they're living in a dystopia. But what are those specific problems? Well, let's go through these problems and look at the dystopian media that analyzes them. While it's definitely outshined by other big problems with society, population collapse is a growing concern for nearly all of the world. The media doesn't really focus on it because it doesn't bring in any ratings. It's a gradual problem of statistics and trend lines. But when you examine it more closely, it could shake the very foundations on which our society is built. Modern economies are dependent on growth. If a country's economy stops growing for just a few months, it slips into recession and millions of people see the standard of living drop, often for years afterwards.
And I feel like this is just something that's going to happen. I mean, when times are bad, people have more children, people, work a lot, and when things are good, people stop having children and people stop working. I mean, it's a wave that's going to happen, and I mean, you need to ride the wave. I don't think there's anything particularly, to blame for this. It's just how human society is. Like, I don't think porn is the reason motherfuckers ain't getting laid and gonna drop society. I don't think it's any of these woo-woo existential ideas. I think it's just the wave that societies will have to deal with in this modern day and age, and it's something you just gotta prepare for, and that's my opinion. I mean,
To this assumption that the economy will just keep growing is built onto the idea that there will always be more people to fill all of the jobs that society needs. Population collapse throws a spanner in the works. As it stands today, large parts of the working population in nearly all developed countries are set to enter retirement over the next few decades, but there's far fewer people being born or entering the workplace to fill this gap. It means that the world is already dealing with a large dependent population compared to a small proportion of working, economically productive people. It's not the kind of problem that seems like it would create a dystopia all on its own, unless you dial this up to 11. That's the scenario that the 2006 film Children of Men explores. The film is set in an alternate future where nobody has been able to have children for 2 decades, pushing society to the edge. Developing countries have almost entirely collapsed without a working population to keep them sustained. Richer, developed countries are a bit better off, but the massive amounts of refugees combined with the economic hardship have pushed them deep into authoritarianism. The film revolves around an apathetic civil servant trying to protect humanity's last chance at a brighter future, the only baby to be born in years. A lot of the movie's strength isn't in the plot though, instead it's the background information and the details that really tie the film together. There's so much there to make it feel authentic. Some of the details that fans have noticed really show how much thought they put into this. While the film was released years before the Shard was built in London, the film is set in the future so it's visible in the skyline. Then there's the underlying detail that people have become even more obsessed with their pets because they're trying to fill the hole that children left. A lot of the political commentary and the details of the overarching story are left in the background as well. As we mentioned earlier, dystopian media often amplifies and magnifies things going on in our own world, and this is no exception. The two sides of the conflict in Children of Men are both distortions of today's political divide. The rich and powerful are depicted as fascist oppressors, living in their own little bubbles, oblivious to the suffering going on around them.
I'm quiet because actually I'm kind of wanting to watch this movie on the high seas. That's all I have to say about this. Look, I need to put commentary where I can.
They hoard art from the old world, but it's all meaningless because it's been taken out of the world which gave it context, and soon nobody will be around to appreciate it. They keep this shaky establishment in place with propaganda, brutal reprisals and oppression. You would expect the film's version of the left to therefore be the good guys, fighting to take down the oppressive system, but instead they're just much more morally grey. One of the first action scenes is later revealed to be an inter-faction assassination plot, for example, and it shows how divided and power-hungry they really are, trying to use humanity's last hope as a political tool. They clearly want to tear down the old order, but that's the only thing they're unified by. At the end of the film, in a big battle scene, they're still just as violent and threatening to the last hope of humanity as the government has been. The whole political conflict running through the movie is framed as the result of hopelessness for the future, but when they see that hope and they see the baby at the end of the movie, it's one of the most powerful moments in the film. All the conflict and the fighting just stops when they can see that there is still hope. Children of Men does a great job of visualizing our worst fears when it comes to population collapse, but it goes even deeper than that. The film explores the problems with a decaying society. The fact that it's all so intuitive and recognizable shows us a lot about our own world today. The deep resemblance definitely pushes us towards the conclusion that we are in fact living in a dystopia, but it also definitely helps that the movie is trying to imagine what our times would look like. It's a very realistic, close to home dystopia set only a few years from the current day.
Yeah, and it's odd. You have all these works of fiction that depicts, not entirely this will happen, but, here's the extreme of this if things continue down, the road that is going. And a lot of people just like, no, I don't care. A lot of people, no, like, I don't care. We have our problems and we have our issues and that we want to impose on everybody else. It's like, oh, okay. Very, very odd.
Different test would be to see how our world stacks up against a dystopia that seems like it's much more different to our world. One where flying cars, cyborgs, and other futuristic technologies are everywhere. Like the world of Blade Runner 2049, cyberpunk is
absolute fucking banger. iRobot, absolute banger, even though it had Will Smith. But hell, say what you want about Will Smith, man can act.
Genre, and Blade Runner in particular focuses on what it means to be human and where we should draw the line between human and machine. In the film, we see a world where every intangible part of humanity has been figured out and replicated, then turned into a product. These human-like machines or replicants are everywhere in the film, and they're treated like a lower class of individual. They're human in pretty much every single way except for the fact they still can't have children of their own. It's the final barrier yet to be broken down by technology, and Blade Runner 2049's world uses it as justification for their slavery. The story follows Kay, a replicant whose job it is to hunt down other replicants that have gone rogue and rebelled against their programming. In the process, he discovers the body of a replicant who has given birth. It's a discovery that could change the whole society's view on replicants, but as we'll find out, it's also something which could seal the fate of replicants as lower class citizens forever. Wallace, the de facto corporate overlord of the world and the creator of the replicants, also wants to find the promised child. Replicants are still expensive and slow to create, meaning they still can't fully replace people. If he can unlock that final secret, it'll perfect his product and give him pretty much total control. It's this fact that makes the film feel so close to home, despite all the futuristic technology and skyscraper-sized holograms.
Yeah, it's also an amazing story. I mean, this was the power of American entertainment back then that, again, companies try to, for lack of a better term, replicate, but they completely fail to do it because they try to shove modern bullcrap and modern problems into it that doesn't even resonate with the majority of Americans, but it sure as hell does not resonate with anyone across the world. It resonates with a small fringe minority of people, and if you shit on the product, they yell at you. But yeah, I mean, you have product placements, you have these massive corporate overlord structures, and it's just the set piece and the scenes of all these just look cool, right? And you can just look past all of that and be like, oh, well, this is just a cool movie. Did I go ahead a little bit more? Oh, whatever.
Wallace, the de facto corporate overlord of the world.
Yeah, like I looked at this and I was like, that's cool.
The creator of the replicants also wants to find the promised child. Replicants are still expensive and slow to create, meaning they still can't fully replace people. If he can unlock that final secret, it'll perfect his product and give him pretty much total control. It's this fact that makes the film feel so close to home, despite all the futuristic technology.
Yeah, this looks fucking amazing, but it's such a very dark setting.
And skyscraper-sized holograms. It's a world caught in an awkward middle phase, stuck between the past and a utopian future. If non-sentient replicants were perfected and there were enough of them, you could imagine freeing up enough resources for everyone to have a good life. But instead, their scarcity and the tyrannical control of corporations has made the world even more unequal. All the wealth and power is hoarded by the ruling corporate class. The rest of the world is left in an even worse position. We see this in the film when he visits the factory that is all still held up by child labor and oppression. The technology that promised salvation for the masses has instead only deepened those gaps. It mirrors the way that technology seems to be impacting our world today. We're constantly told about how innovations like AI are going to make the economy more productive and therefore make people's lives better. But
I mean, it'll probably be productive for, the companies and, for the upper management, but replace a lot of the people like artists and replace a lot of. And again, I think if AI makes a better product, the consumer doesn't fucking care who gets replaced. So you as the artist, you as the company needs to give people a reason to accept you and believe that you can still come out with a better product. If you can't do that, again, all the say gamers want are good games. Now, and the reason why people shit on AI is because it's perceived lack of quality. But we don't know. Like AI, you can argue that AI is better today than it's been, say, I don't know, the beginning of this year. And just imagine how it's going to be in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Like it could absolutely replace artists, at least at the corporate level. But will replace good artists at the levels for commissions online? Probably not.
as we've gotten more advanced, people are increasingly seen as numbers on a spreadsheet. The further we go, the more the world seems to alienate people. Despite
Yeah, see, this is the human resource way of looking at things, treating humans like lines on a paper. I mean, if you work these jobs and upper management jobs, at the end of the day, eventually you'll just start to see things that way. Like, you'll have your friends and your family and you're eating good and everyone around you are eating good, but at the job, you don't really see the people under you if you're up in that office, that refrigerator, that air conditioned office, with the window open, and you see people working under you. I mean, it's just the way upper management tends to see people.
massive improvements in productivity.
Yeah, it's not a good thing, right? But at the end of the day, you gotta understand that companies are not your friend, they're not your family. It's a social contract that you signed. I work for you, you pay me, give me benefits, I go home and feed my family. If you look at it that way, a lot of things just make sense. Like you may not like them, but you're like, okay, well, how do I make this work for me?
Activity and wealth creation, tons of people are just poorer and have less opportunities than they had 10 or even 50 years ago. The world of Blade Runner 2049 has gone further on this path than ours has. Corporations are publicly in full control of every branch of the government, for example, rather than just pulling the strings from the background. But the fact that we're even on this path to begin with betrays a dystopian quality about our modern world, and how it doesn't seem like it's designed for people anymore. This is just one small part of the themes explored by Blade Runner 2049, of course. To get a more detailed breakdown, check out our full video on the movie. We've seen 2 dystopian societies so far that have turned into dystopias by outside forces. Either the progression and misuse of technology in the case of Blade Runner, or a global fertility crisis in Children of Men. But these aren't necessary. All you need for a dystopia is a society that's reliant or even designed to create its own misery. Enter 1984. The essential and possibly the most oppressive dystopian society ever imagined. There's a reason that 1984 has had such a huge impact on culture. It explains the workings of an oppressive society incredibly well. Even decades later, and nothing else gives us the same tools to accurately deconstruct the totalitarianism of our own world.
Yeah, and again, it's also made with, the understanding of historically what has happened at that time and with people of the time, and I think it was the Soviet Union. I mean, that's yet another movie I'm gonna have to fucking watch. Goddamn.
which we've also done a huge video on before. The world of 1984 is defined by stagnation. The ideology of the ruling party and the world they created is expertly designed to suppress and dominate every other part of life. One of the most striking parts of Orwell's dystopia is what the party has done to language. Normal languages like the kind that we use don't exist in a vacuum. Every word or phrase we say only has any meaning based on the context in which it's said. The philosopher Wittgenstein explains this through his theory of language games. Take the word cut for example. If you read it in a recipe, it's probably referring to something about chopping vegetables, but a director shouting it on a movie set would make the word mean something completely different. All words are like this, they're all dependent on the specific language game that you're playing at the time. They're just building blocks. In 1984 though, even this freedom is in the process of being suppressed. Orwell imagined the party creating a new language called Newspeak, where most of the linking words have been taken out, while other words have been changed or removed entirely. The result is a language which has barely any building blocks and where the context has already been decided. It only works and you can only understand it in the context of submitting to a party rule. Rebellion and disagreement within the party line is therefore impossible to even comprehend when using Newspeak. As we've said before, dystopian media often amplifies things we see in our own world today. And while we haven't created a whole new language yet, we have seen certain words and phrases getting removed from our language completely. And so
Yep, you see this again. And it's so fucking stupid. It's like people see things like this happening, and they're like, yes. Like, you also gotta understand, stupid shit like this, people will defend this. Just ordinary, ideologically possessed people will defend something like this. Like how in games, they're not supposed to use male and female. It's body type A, body type B, right? These are, ideological linguistic games that are being thrusted upon people, at least in the gaming industry, and hell, even in social media sites as a whole. And people see when this is happening, and everyone absolutely voices their complaints, but you can't do it on social media because they'll just ban you. Oh, and banning is also an interesting thing. Like, if you're banned on one social media site, you'll be cross-banned on other social media sites. You have Ubisoft that brag about the fact that they will call the police on their paying fucking customers, right? You have Twitch being like, oh, we will ban you for things you've done off of our site, so we monitor what you do off other places that are on our site, and if you do something we don't want, we'll ban you on our site. And again, people look at this and they're like, yes, this is something that should happen. Yes. So it's like, yeah, people that will want this to happen because their ideology demands it happens. But then you have just normal people that will look at this, look at Facebook groups, say they were censored just for using the word men. Like, if you ask your everyday Walmart American, your Costco American that they've done this, they'll be like, wow, that is some stupid, retarded shit. But you're not supposed to say that on Facebook, because then they'll ban you. So they're banning the way people can express what the fuck's happening. Like, you weren't supposed to talk about COVID, or you weren't supposed to be critical of the Pfizer vaccine, otherwise they would ban you, right? And if you're, say, Joe Rogan, there'd be this apparatus in place to try to drag you through the fucking mud. I mean, that's the problem. That's why people are like, wow, maybe we are living in a dystopian. And again, people defend this. There are people that ideologically believe that, yes, you should be banned for, being critical of the Pfizer vaccine, even a little bit. It's fucking ridiculous. And I want to believe the vaccine's fine. Even Trump was all for the vaccine. But he wasn't for shutting down half the fucking country. And even I'm like, everything that's happened since then is fucking retarded.
Social media is one of the biggest culprits. There's plenty of words which would be more accurate, but we can't actually say them because of YouTube's arbitrary rule.
Yeah. And again, YouTube also does this stupid ass fucking thing where there are words you're not supposed to use, otherwise they'll demonetize you. right? Because they want to play mommy, they want to play daddy, they want, you know, that's like the advertisers unionized and told YouTube, look, this is what you will do, and if you don't do this, we'll pull out. But now the advertisers just don't have the amount of power that they think they do. Because a lot of companies, social media sites are just being like, shut the fuck up, bitch.
It's all a way to restrict language so that things people talk about fit into the sanitized corporate context which they want to force on people.
Yeah, and again, people will absolutely be like, yes, yes, this should happen. And it doesn't really matter the reason. At least to most normal people, they don't care your ideological reason to ban Englishmen because it's too gendered. No one fucking cares your ideology. They'll see that and be like, yeah, because it's fucking stupid.
All the stuff we've been talking about seems to confirm our worst fears, that we are living in a dystopia. The fact that our society embodies so many dystopian
Mark Zuckerberg? Oh my fucking god.
Qualities seems to confirm this, but it still isn't the full picture. There's still one part of dystopian media that we haven't actually fully discussed, and that's the theme of hope, which is always present in some way or another. Some dystopian stories have a positive ending, which implies that the society moved on from this phase and got better in some way. Children of Men is like that, for example. It's all about the power of hope. Others, like 1984, seem like they end with all hope having been extinguished. The main character of Winston eventually succumbs to indoctrination and loses his humanity. But even in the bleakest dystopia imaginable, that hope still exists somewhere. The parts of life the party is trying to suppress and make people forget will always exist, however well they're hidden. It means that while our world has dystopian qualities and it does seem to be getting worse in lots of ways, we'll never truly live in a real dystopia. The world is just too complex and varied for any one thing or problem to dominate it completely. There's still tons of problems, and for an increasing amount of unlucky people, they come to dominate their individual lives. It doesn't mean that the good parts of life like art, music, hobbies, friends and family aren't there. Our modern world has made it harder and harder to lose yourself in those parts of life. It all gets in the way and we're bombarded with these dystopian problems constantly, and it's made the skill of being able to tune all of that out even more important.
Yeah, that's also a problem, right? They weaponize, like the media have weaponized, I guess for lack of a better term, people's fear, right? Like online, again, twists reality, and it's almost like in this weird way that, and people 100% fall for this. They see what they see on the phone and they treat it like, oh my god, reality is absolutely going bonkers. And I'm like, my brother in Christ, never treat anything what you see online seriously, right? Because you gotta understand, it is people with an agenda trying to impose, like, always assume what you see on that screen is trying to push a narrative onto you and operate based off that. Like, you can 100% believe it, you cannot, but just understand that everything you see is being pushed onto you. The quality of art and entertainment has taken a steep decline in recent years. Yep. And again, people want this to happen. Like, there are regulations and bureaucracies in place that allow this to happen. If you talk against this, they'll come after you. Those who grew up in the dystopia won't know how good it's used to be. I don't know what's worse, knowing or not knowing. I mean, I don't know. I'm just glad I didn't grow up in those. Like, short answer, yes. Yeah. It's just to reflect how advancement in technology, which should ideally lead to better lives, actually reflect traits of dystopia as they seem to widen social gaps. And again, there are apparatuses in place that want this to happen, like the legacy news media in the past 4 years were like, yes, you should widen the social gap between you and the people around you if they don't ideologically think the same way as you, and people fall for it all the fucking time. And I find it weird because, again, going to college, working a job on the ground. It's like I've met so many people from so many walks of lives that have different opinions, and we've just got along. We've gamed. We shot the shit. It's just not something that was a I found to be weird. I find it weird to think, oh no, this person needs to act the same way, look the same way, speak the same way as me, or I will not hang out with them. To me, that's fucking weird. No, that dystopian, like any dictatorship, needed two things to come true: the bad people willing to act, and good people unwilling to act. I mean, again, with dictatorships, how people act is okay. How do I and my family get ahead? I mean, you've seen this under communism and under socialism, you know, under other oppressive regimes. Like, this is just how into families, how individuals, how the people around you will act. It's like, okay, how do we get ahead? And eventually, that way of thinking kind of fell. No, the Soviet Union eventually dropped the Iron Curtain. I left school in 1996. Hey, is when I was born. It never did. I think the future would be like this. It's one big disappointment. I'm dreading the future for my kids. Well, again, at the end of the day, you really only have the power to influence you and the people around you, and give the people around you, including your kids, the tools and knowledge they need to get ahead. There is a lot of uncertainty, but at the end of the day, you need to have certainty within yourself. I mean, if it was supposed to be a warning, not to tutorial on what would need to be a warning, not a tutorial on what to do. Yeah. Water in Flint, Michigan, rolling blackouts in Southern California, riots and looting without consequences. This is what a dystopian looks like. Now, this is what, you know, media acquisition of information gets you. You know, it's the media ruling, like legacy media having the rule. Well, at least the third thing is media having rule the law, like monopoly on information gets you. It does get people mad and people, wanting to tear down the fucking system. To learn who rules you, simply find out who you're not allowed to criticize. I mean, basic bitch saying. Everyone says there's no youth to fill the jobs, yet no one is able to find a job and be the biggest, maybe the biggest dystopian phenomenon from my personal experience. Yeah, at least in the case of jobs. Like, if you look at so many entry level jobs, they demand you have at least 2 years of college, and a couple years of work experience. It's like, wait, isn't this an entry level job? And this is the thing that I would change. If it's an entry level job, you should not need to go to college for it. Like, I don't really, again, in this need to remove a risk, you just raise the bar for people that could probably 100% work the job. And again, I don't know the requirements of the job in particular, but if it says the word entry level, people will assume non-college educated jobs. So if it requires a college education, then it just take away the entry level. Living in housing games. Oh, God. Wait, I need Children of Men is one of my favorites ever. Well, that's all I really got to say about this. Peace.